Hello, everyone. My name is Miguel Myers. Welcome to My Horror Confessional, where every week I'll have a guest come on and talk about one classic horror movie that they haven't seen and why. We'll discuss the movie, the actors, and probably get off topic quite a bit. Once I believe that they have properly atoned, I will absolve them of their horror movie sin. Today, we have Leticia Urieta. Leticia is a Tejana writer from Austin, Texas, and she's a graduate of Agnes Scott College with a BA in English and creative writing and holds an MFA in fiction writing from Texas State University. She works as a teaching artist in the Austin community with a focus on the pedagogy?
Yeah, you got it.
Pedagogy. Okay.
Yeah.
That's one of those words that you just read, and I don't really
Right.
say it out loud very much. With
True,
a
true.
focus on the pedagogy of equity and creative writing. She is the regional program manager for Austin Batcave and is the director of Barrio Writers in Austin, a free college-level youth writers workshop founded by author and activist Sarah Rafael Garcia in Santa Ana, California. Her creative works appear in Pank, Chicon Street Poets, Lumina, and many others. Her fiction explores the intersections of Latinx identity with the folklore, traditional stories, and the supernatural or speculative. Her chapbook, The Monster, is out now from Libro Mobile Press. Her hybrid collection, Las Criaturas, which I own and have read
Yeah.
and loved. It was a finalist for the Sergio Troncoso Award for Best First Book of Fiction 2022 from the Texas Institute of Letters. It's out now from Flowersong Press. Leticia, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Megan, for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to talk about this movie and talk horror. Yeah, I'm really excited.
Yeah, and I was excited to talk to you. There's a lot of stuff that we just went over, so I don't want to glaze over that because
Sure.
that was a pretty lengthy bio.
Yes, yeah.
So first, I wanted to talk about Austin Batcave. Can you explain
Yeah.
to me a little bit more about what that is?
Yeah, for sure. So Austin Batcave is a local Austin nonprofit that offers creative writing programs to youth and students in the area. We serve students in second grade through 12th grade. And part of my role is to work with our partners to plan after school programs, summer camps, and kind of programs that serve different needs and different populations across the greater Austin area, including outside of Austin. Because one of the big issues in Austin, obviously, is lack of affordable housing, gentrification, and folks being displaced from their neighborhoods. And so we're also kind of trying to make sure that we're serving communities outside of Austin as well. So, and all of our programs right now are horror themed, which is really exciting.
Nice.
All of the staff, including myself, are big horror fans. And so, so it's been really cool to work with the kids in this genre that they are really excited to be doing. So we did a horror comedy camp last week. We did a post-apocalyptic fiction camp. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
That sounds great. I can't imagine what I would have done if I had access to that as a kid.
Oh my gosh, I know.
That sounds amazing. How did you get connected with that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So when I was at Texas State, I met the founder of Austin Batcave, Manuel Gonzalez, and who's a fiction writer. And then I also got connected with them because I think a lot of Austin Batcave folks and volunteers are also like Texas State students. And so I volunteered with them for a couple of times. And then as I became more of an independent community teaching artist and gained experience in program development, a job opened up for their regional programs. And I applied and got it, and so kind of made my way in that. And actually, more recently, I just got promoted to program director. So now I am in charge of all of our programs, which is pretty cool.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. It's been really great organization to work with. We're small but mighty. We're only 5 employees. So yeah, we do a lot with a little bit.
And so, how do you guys work off of donations or volunteers? If somebody wanted to volunteer, how would they do so?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm happy to send the link for this, but yeah, we're always in need of volunteers. Volunteers can help, working directly with students. They can also help us by, helping with tabling at events, especially because we also have a mobile library. It's called the Batmobile. It's a Cat Metro access bus that we worked with local artists and carpenters to retrofit into a mobile classroom and library. And then over the course of the pandemic, the role of the bus has kind of changed so that myself and my colleague drive it around, and we actually get books from other nonprofits and Texas Book Festival, Book Springs, and some others, and we redistribute those books to students in our programs, especially in AISD and Del Valle ISD. So those are events where volunteers can help out. Like we just did one at the Del Valle Day for the Circuit of the Americas, which is really, really cool. It's hot, but but we gave away like over 200 books, which is great. And then, yeah, they can volunteer to help with editing our Austin Batcave anthology that we publish every year. And the next anthology theme is Face Your Fears. It's going to be all horror, kind of fear, exploring fear in different instances. And so we're really excited about that.
That sounds amazing, especially in the face of the what's going on in the culture right now with books being banned and librarians being threatened and everything that's happening. The work that you guys are doing is so important, and it's amazing that there's people like you and organizations like Austin Batcave doing that. So I want to be completely honest and tell you that I wasn't aware of Austin Batcave, and so just hearing about it right now, I mean, thank you for that, all that work that you guys are doing. It's amazing.
No, I mean, I think that you're right that it takes a lot of different people doing different, kind of doing different things to make sure that students still have access to the books that they want to read, to books that that are high quality, that are newer, that represent their experiences, right? And I think that's what we're always trying to kind of consider, is how can we make sure that we're not just kind of giving them the same things that they've always had, especially because the majority of our students are students of color. And also, wanting to make sure that we have representations for trans and queer students, right? So yeah, it's the little bit we can do, but I think it does make an impact. And we also work with our local libraries, including, the Austin Public Library and the Pflugerville Library. We've also started working with the Round Rock and Cedar Park Library. So yeah, I mean, we also want to support our librarians because they are doing so much in the face of a lot of frankly, fascist censorship in our community. So,
yeah, I never thought that librarians would be at the front lines of this, a war, a culture war that's
right.
being waged. But yeah, that's it's really amazing work. Have you guys seen any pushback, especially what's going on in the zeitgeist now? Anything like for people like bothering you or whatever? Like, have you seen any pushback with what you're doing?
In general, no. We're kind of operating in this space that's a little bit unique, right? So like as a nonprofit, we're not hemmed in by the laws and kind of the oversight of like curriculum and things like that are like, public libraries are, that our school librarians and teachers are. So that's kind of nice because we can operate on this more community level where we can, kind of act unilaterally and make our own decisions for and actually like survey and listen to our students. And when I do a book visit, I ask like, what do you want me to bring, right? What kind of graphic novels do you want? Because they love graphic novels and so do I. Yeah. But what kind of genres do you want? Because I think that's what's really important. Kids are so, definitely like one of the most disenfranchised groups of people in the whole world, right? Like they're not able to make a lot of decisions for themselves. They, have to kind of like follow the whims of adults, and they on a day-to-day basis, they get very little choice in their lives. You know what I mean? So if we can give them at least a little bit of autonomy, I think that's really important, to teach them that their voices matter, that their choices matter, that their interests matter. If we can do that, I think that that's really like a big goal for me. So to say that we haven't had a ton of pushback personally, there was a bookseller who would sell, before she had a storefront, the book Borough in Pflugerville, actually, which is where I live. She would pop up at the Pflugerville Farmers Market, and then apparently someone who had not read my book, Las Criaturas, but saw the cover of it, complained to the mayor of Pflugerville that I was peddling Satanism, quote unquote. Yep, exactly. So that was fun.
Yeah, I was just saying, like, this is a dope ass cover. What's
I mean, yeah, I can definitely talk more about that cover, but like,
yeah,
it's just funny to me, you know. I think it speaks to, obviously nothing came of that, and so it was more that it wasn't like, it was, you know, the book wasn't banned or anything like that, because they couldn't ban it from, you know, being sold by a private bookseller. But you know, it was just funny to me that this person didn't even bother to engage with the work at all, and just made this kind of like jump assumption about what the book was even about, and then kind of made a decision that because she didn't want her kids engaging with it, which, you know, the book is not for kids necessarily either, that no one else should be able to have access to it. And I think that's a huge part of the problem, right? Yeah, it's very bizarre. I don't understand this way of thinking, but I think what it, sorry, this is my like tangent, and I feel very strongly about this, but I think what it, yeah, what it comes down to is this, and again, going back to like a lack of autonomy for children, this need to like control and obedience over everything. And I think that extends to like the larger population, right? You know, a population of people that are obedient and controlled are much easier to kind of manage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you see it in all fashions, like dictatorships. It's like getting rid of the book so that people are uneducated and can't read. I mean, what did Donald Trump say? He loves the uneducated.
Right, exactly.
There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
But so I will say this: we're going to be continuing I believe I call it the Sunday school sessions. That was the last. We just started this last week with Andrew Hilbert, and we'll be continuing that this week with Leticia, where after this show, myself and Leticia will keep talking, and that's going to be on the Patreon. So if you have any interest in that, patreon.com/myhorrorconfessional, and we can get into just about, because I honestly could talk about this for a very long time, and I know you probably can as well. So we'll talk about that more, and just some other stuff that we just shoot the shit basically on that show. So but I did also want to talk about the other thing, that you're the director of Barrio Writers in Austin. And could you give me like a brief explanation what that is?
Yeah. So Barrio Writers, again, I got involved with when I was at Texas State, because Sara Rafael Garcia, who's the founder, was one of the students in my program, in my cohort, and she and I have since become friends, but I kind of got involved just as a, you know, helper and instructor with that program, which is generally a week-long kind of intensive writing program for teens, for youth in the area, that focuses on exploring and writing about identity, writing about kind of social justice issues that affect teens specifically. So in the past few years, we've talked about gun violence. We've talked about immigration and how that affects our students' communities, especially many of whom are dealing with being undocumented, right? And kind of the threat, specifically in Texas, of ICE and other, government entities who are trying to separate families and who are, unfortunately successful at separating families. And so, again, similar to what we do at Austin Batcave, that one is a little bit more of a focused writing program during the summertime, but, we do still work to publish student writing, and we always end with a reading to celebrate student work at the end of the week. We partner with Red Salmon Arts, which is through Resistencia Bookstore, which is a local Chicanx indigenous bookstore in Austin. It's been in Austin for, I think, over 40 years now. It's founded by Raul Salinas, who was a formerly incarcerated poet. And so a lot of the models of Barrio Writers are kind of modeled after some of the workshops that he used to do with incarcerated youth who were writing poetry and kind of exploring their voices. And then we've also partnered and expanded into Pflugerville. And so we work with UT Austin and the Latino Studies department there. And then we also work with the Pflugerville Library. And now my colleague and good friend, Tez Figueroa, is kind of co-directing with me. So they run the Austin branch and I run the Pflugerville branch. And been doing that for the last couple of years. And it's a lot of work, but I really, really love it.
That sounds amazing. I do a horror podcast, so what you do is like so important, and it's so amazing. It's great to hear that there's people out there doing that really important work. Again, just thank you for that. So I do want to talk more about that, but we'll save it for the post show. But I did want to point out or focus on one part of that you were talking about, which was like kids in like an immigrant community. And that kind of points to like the story, the first story that I read of yours, which is The Monster, which is the first book in the first story in your book, Las Criaturas. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit. When I first met you at the Gula show, and I was playing, I was playing Death. I wanted to talk, so it was a bit sillier environments, but so I asked you about it, but obviously it doesn't really, the environment doesn't necessitate like a good response to that, I would say, or not say your response was bad. Starting over, I would like to just talk to you about that story a little bit. Where did that come from? Did it come from your experience working with these kids, or just if you could talk about that a bit?
Yeah, for sure. That story was really challenging to write and really, like went through many drafts. Yeah. I mean, and that was kind of the point, right? Is, at the time that I wrote it, I believe it was 2016, and I was in my second year of my MFA program. I was struggling personally with the environment that I was in. And I've talked about this before, but, I think many folks can attest to the fact that if you are not a white man in some of these academic spaces, like you are, these are not spaces that were originally built for us. And so it's really challenging sometimes to be in environments where the community is not necessarily there. And so I was struggling kind of with that and some of the microaggressions that had occurred, which of course, like other Latinas and other, students of color had it way worse than I did for sure. But I was struggling with just that environment and the rhetoric that I was kind of dealing with in that environment. And then at the same time, I was still, so prior to working with Austin Batcave and Barrio Writers, I was a bilingual teacher. I taught kindergarten through fourth grade. So most of the students that I worked with were immigrant students, or they, their families were immigrants, and maybe they were like first or second generation, many of whom were undocumented as well. And some of what I did for families, if I was asked, with like writing letters of support for their immigration or green card applications, right, or things like that. Some who were going through like refugee applications, and so there's lots of different experiences. And sometimes I would teach multiple generations of students, right? So I would have a sibling, and then I would have their younger sibling. And so, I
Yeah.
got really connected with these families, and this was when a lot of the incarceration of children and families was ramping up. Let's be very clear. I don't want to let the Obama administration off the hook for this, because they were very much complicit in the caging of children as well, and the incarceration of children. But I know that it definitely got a lot worse under Trump, and this was when his campaign was spewing the just absolutely hateful rhetoric about migrants, and kind of closing the borders. And we've only seen that rhetoric get much, much worse over time. But yeah, so I was thinking about the children who were arriving at the border, by themselves, right, or who were separated from their families, who were being incarcerated, who were being like hyper surveilled. And I was, in dealing kind of with my own like grief, even though I don't have children, and I'm not undocumented. I have family members who have, and then we've kind of helped with that processes as well. But that's not my direct experience. But I was kind of just constantly heartbroken, thinking about like, what does that do to a child who I work with on a daily basis, to have them not only feel that they are being watched at all times, but they are being, that they're being threatened, their families are being threatened at all times, but that they're also being made to feel that they are criminals, they're bad for literally the act of migration, right? Which is a natural act that, for existing, exactly, for existing and existing in public. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit emotional just talking about it, but so I think that's kind of where the story came from, and I did some research on some of the incarceration that was happening here, specifically in Texas. There's a few detention centers in the area, and obviously, in kind of in the borderlands. And South Texas is where some of my family is from, and so kind of knowing what that area is like and what the culture is like there. And so that's kind of where the story started. And I remember I changed the perspective a number of times, and I remember changing it to the direct address to you, right? And my professor, who was helping me edit the story at the time, asked me why I made that choice. And I said, because I don't want people to be able to escape it,
Yeah. I think that was a great choice, because you said you were getting emotional, like it's because you're human, and we just need other people to act that same way with empathy. When I was reading it, it was a very emotional story. I am just like you. I'm not undocumented but I'm Mexican, Puerto Rican, but I have I have family members who were undocumented. My father came over undocumented. So, I do have empathy for that. And it was just a hard story. And it's specifically the viewpoint of you, or, the way that you wrote it. You can't escape. You are in it. And you just get that feeling of, in and of itself, it's horrific, the act of what they're doing. They're caging these families and these children. That in by itself is horrific. And then when you add your touch to your flair to it, it makes it just a great, it was just a great story, and a great story to lead off your book. So I just wanted to, just talk about that for a second. It was really affecting, and I think you did a great job with it.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for, I just appreciate anybody who's engaging with the work. And, like I said, I I struggled with that story because it felt right to write, at the time. But, I also struggled with, yeah, like, am I the person to write this story? Like, this isn't my direct experience. And so I really had to like make sure that when I was doing it, I felt like I was doing it well enough to convey, I guess, the feeling. I do think that other authors, who have those direct experiences have done it, have talked about this issue a lot better than I have. And like, I got to interview another author whose memoir I think is just amazing. It's Marcelo Hernandez. And I'm just trying to remember. Yeah, Marcelo Hernandez Castillo. And he has a beautiful memoir called Children of the Land that I highly, highly recommend other folks reading. So it's not speculative, and kind of what, it's not fictionalized like I made mine, but that book, I think, more than any other book I've read, really gets to the heart of like the effect of criminalizing children, and how it affected him even into his adulthood. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there.
Oh, thank you for that suggestion. I will link it in the show notes as well as your work. So I did want to get started talking about the movie, but before we do so, would you please let everybody know how they can follow you, where they can support you, you support your work, all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So for my work, you can go to awesomebatcave.org. And if you ever want to sign up to volunteer, there's a button on the website to sign up. You can also email me about Awesome Batcave and Barrio Writers. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter. Who knows how long I'll be. I have so much love for Twitter and the community that I've built there, but whew,
it's gone downhill
Elon Musk
very
is,
fast.
Oh yeah, it's making, yeah. Elon Musk is really making it a challenge to be on Twitter, and just like the absolute censorship there. But anyway, that's a whole other subject. But yeah, you can follow me there, and I can also link to my website as well. I have some work coming out. I have a short story, a short kind of body horror story coming out in a book from Arte Publico Press called A Night of Screams, Latino Horror Stories. And that just came out this week. So yeah, happy to kind of link to and share some of the work that's forthcoming.
Great. Yeah. And I will also link your page, or whatever link you want to in the show notes as well, so people can follow you and support you, purchase your books, volunteer, all the great work that you're doing. They can do that. So all right. So you are actually on the show to confess your sin of never having seen The Masque of the Red Death from 1964. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so let's step back a bit. And what is your history with horror? Did you grow up liking it? Did you grow up watching horror movies, or was it kind of like being in a Latino family? Was it kind of like frowned upon, like that was my experience, or yeah? So what was your journey with horror first?
It's funny because I was definitely a very scared, anxious little baby. I come by anxiety rightly. It runs in the family, and so I think that I have always been like pretty easily scared. I feel like my connection to horror, though, just came from being like a 90s baby. Well, like born in the 80s, being raised in the 90s, where it's like just a lot of unsupervised time to access like horror media. And so from a pretty young age, like I remember my dad's side of the family, who's the Mexican side, like we watched Gremlins at one point, and that scared the shit out of me. And then like I was left alone with a family friend who happened to be watching the original It miniseries, which traumatized me. And see, my parents divorced when I was 4, so the supervision that my mom had kind of over me, and then when I went to visit my dad, was very different.
Okay.
yeah, so when he was chilling with his friends, we were watching it, and I think my mom definitely, unfortunately, had to deal with the brunt of the fallout of that film because like I was terrified to shower after that. I was
Oh, what
terrified
age
of
are
the
we talking
thing.
about here?
Oh gosh, this is, I don't know how accurate this is, but I feel like it had to be like eight or nine, maybe.
Okay. Still very
Um,
young. Still very young.
yeah, kind of pre-adolescence. And it's funny, there was a painted portrait of myself as like a 3-year-old, I guess, from a photograph that used to hang in the hallway of our house when I was growing up. And after seeing it, I don't know if you remember the scene where um, Bill goes into Georgie's room and there's like a photo album and he opens it and then the photo album starts to spurt blood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I became terrified of my own portrait hanging in the hallway. That's how much this movie affected
Okay.
me.
All right.
Uh, so yeah, that was fun. But
Have you seen it since, or is it off
yes,
limits
I
to you?
have, and
Okay.
and
Okay.
I love Tim Curry. He's one of my all-time favorite actors. Loved
Yeah.
him, and subsequently, obviously, watched like Rocky Horror and a lot of his other media. But yeah, and so now I can watch it, and it does not affect me in the same way at all. But I think that I had that dual. I started to realize that as I consumed more horror media, I had that dual feeling of like, this scares the shit out of me. Oh no, like I'm gonna have nightmares forever. I have this really terrible fear of this. But then also like the dual thrill, I guess, that comes from that
Yeah.
fear. And then like wanting to kind of be obsessed with whatever that media is and like watching more of it. So that was the way it was with like the Halloween films. I watched Halloween H2O with a friend and got scared really badly. um, but then like
You're
of course,
scared at like the quality of the mask and how
yeah,
terrible it
well,
was.
that too, yes. That film, you know, yeah, certain parts of that film hold up. That was the
Oh,
first time I'd ever seen Michael Myers though, so that was like, yeah,
okay. That was
yeah,
I think I saw that on my 16th birthday
nice,
when it came out. So that's like, I hold that one near and dear to me.
yeah,
So yeah, I don't care. I just watched it a month ago with my nephew when he came, and I was like, yes, this is so good. It's so good.
yeah. There's, it really also like petition to put Josh Hartnett in all horror films. Him and Justin Long, I think, are two like I love them in every single horror film that they've ever been in.
Or Paul Rudd from Part Six. I
Right.
mean, that was amazing. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I would love to see that. But
Yeah.
Josh Hartnett has to keep that same hair though.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, it's a very specific thing. Like you have him in The Faculty, and then, in 30 Days of Night, which is one of my all-time favorite films that he's in. And, anyway,
yeah.
but I think, so I think like the fear and the thrill of the fear lived in me from an early age. And I struggled with literacy when I was younger. I didn't learn to read till I was in second grade. And then I was kind of reading more voraciously. And so I got into Goosebumps, right? And I got into Fear Street and some of these other kind of books for kids. And then very weirdly, my very Catholic grandmother, who I feel like I truly don't know how this became a tradition for us, but she would watch me after school a couple of days a week when because my mom was a single mom and had to work
Yeah.
long hours. And I would be there like on Thursday afternoons, I believe. And that was when Nickelodeon's Are You Afraid of the Dark aired. And so we would watch it together, and that became like a tradition for us. So
That's
yeah,
awesome. Did
I
she
feel like
like, was that the
horror,
only horror thing that she did that you were
I
aware
don't
of?
know.
Or
That's a good question. But she did enjoy it. Seemed like she enjoyed it, or maybe she just saw that I enjoyed it and like
okay.
something was wrapped up in that. But yeah, it was just something we watched together, and I still yeah, and those episodes scared the crap out of me too, but I still enjoyed them. So I think horror found me and hooked me in, you know what I mean? And then I sought it out more and more over the years. But I really don't know that I have considered myself a horror writer
I was just about to
until
ask.
maybe,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, until maybe last year. Like seriously, as a 36-year-old person, like I think for a long time I thought, well, maybe I write weird stuff, or maybe I write speculative fiction. I kind of like was avoiding naming myself that, and I don't really know why. Yeah.
Well, because we see in almost all parts of media, like horror isn't respected.
Right.
Like with horror movies, like even like the greatest performances won't get an Oscar nomination, or you know in literature, like the books just aren't respected. So I would understand when somebody would be like, oh no, I'm an author who happens to write some horror sort of thing.
Right.
But sometimes you just got to embrace it, because I think the community is amazing, and we can support our own.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's great. So are you do you like find yourself, like, are you still up on all the horror movies, or do you stay on the older movies, or do you just read, or what does your horror journey look like right now?
Oh my gosh, especially over the course of the last few years, I feel like I've just been immersed in it. I think once I let myself really admit, like, yes, you love this, you've always loved this, you seek it out, and I think that horror, especially horror literature, but also horror films, are having this really beautiful, not to say that like this hasn't happened in the past, like horror stories have always been there, but I think horror literature and books and stories are having this really beautiful moment of people just accessing them more freely, and engaging with like so many different like subgenres of horror. And so and as I've gotten more into like both the local Austin and kind of Texas horror community, but also like across the country, and just engaging with more contemporary horror has been great. There's just so many wonderful authors out there that are doing some like fantastically weird shit that I really I just really love. And cosmic horror, body horror, creature horror, like I'm here for all of it. So yeah, I have a stack, plus my phone, plus my library app, like it's
Yes.
just the to be read list is feels insurmountable sometimes, but it's just a really exciting time to be a horror fan, both as a viewer and as a reader. And I have a running list, and actually at the beginning of the pandemic, my younger sister, who's going to be 17 this next month, one of the things that we kind of connected on was the rest of the family wasn't super into watching horror, and she was. And so we kind of like my husband and I did like movie marathons with her, because she was kind of in our pod. And so she would come over and spend the night sometimes, and we would just marathon like a bunch of films she had never seen, like classics like Silence of the Lambs and Nightmare on Elm Street and stuff. But now
That sounds
we've also
amazing.
been, yeah, it was great. And I just love that she loves that. And now we've been getting into kind of some of the newer work, and going to see that together. But it's so funny to me how she watched The Exorcist and was like, meh. But but then she was really scared of The Ring, and The Ring, like, I don't know, The Ring never really scared me very much. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
funny to see what she gets frightened of versus, yeah, I don't
Well,
know,
that,
it's just
that
funny.
I completely understand, because like my nephew, I've connected with him from horror movies, and when he comes to visit us, he comes to visit my wife and I with his girlfriend. We watch horror movies nonstop, because the first year he came over was the pandemic, 2020,
Mm-hmm.
and we couldn't go anywhere. So it's like
Right.
horror movie, horror movie, horror movie. And since then, every time he comes, we just do marathons, and
Mm-hmm.
we stick to franchises to make it easier. And this past time we did Romero's
Oh
Romero's
yeah.
Dead trilogy, right? But we extended, and I did all the way at the six that he did. And I showed him Night of the Living Dead, bored on his phone.
Right.
I'm like, so frustrated. Showed him Dawn of the Dead, comical, laughing, which it's, yes, I get it, like green skin, yeah. But still there's an art form to it, right? That
Yeah.
And I don't want to gatekeep, like his journey is his journey. So I let him have
Yeah.
his thing, and I'm not judging him. Well, I am judging for it, but I didn't say anything to him. And then we saw the Day of the Dead. They liked that one a little bit more because we're coming more into like more realistic stuff. But
Hmm.
but then I asked them to do a ranking of every franchise that we see, like which movie they like the most. And he liked the later trilogy. So that's what Survival of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, and like Land of the
Hmm.
Dead. That's not the right order, but you know what I mean. And he liked, him and his girlfriend both liked those three movies over the original trilogy. And I wanted to flip my lid, but that's their horror movies. Like they can't see past, they're the TikTok era or whatever, which
Yeah,
I'm on
yeah.
TikTok too, but it's just like that's their horror. And I hope that they can like, and maybe perhaps is it your niece? No, your sister, maybe she
My
can
sister, yeah.
like uh go back to what came before and watch
Hmm.
watch that sort of stuff, because there is no like Silence of the Lambs without Night of the Living Dead. Like saying like
Right, right,
it's
right.
built on a foundation. So that's my, okay, let me get off my soapbox here.
No, but I mean, you're speaking to, I mean, I kind of think this leads into this film a little bit too. That's like, you know, I think sometimes it depends on your access point to horror, right? And like, what's the first film or first films maybe that you engaged with when you were younger? That usually sets the tone for like what you think is scary, right? And so, I can go back now and watch the original It miniseries and recognize how campy so much of it is and how Tim Curry is hamming it up. But I can also recognize why it scared me so badly as a kid, right? I have the hindsight to understand that. But yeah, like if they're used to much better effects than we are.
Yeah.
They're used to kind of hyper realism, or even just like the gore being the focus. Whereas I think in some of these earlier films, it was much less about extreme gore and much more about like the subtleties of fear,
Mhm.
which I think comes up a little bit in in the Mask of the Red Death a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think that was well said. And then we can start talking about the
Yep,
movie, but I
sure.
did want to ask you, what was it with this particular film that you hadn't seen? Had it
Mm,
been on the list for a while and just hadn't made it to the top, or had you never heard of it? So what's your
fair.
history with this particular movie?
So I had read the story. Obviously, I think probably in high school, we did like a Poe unit or something like that. And so I'd read the story before, but it had been a long time. And I was watching on Shudder like a year ago. I don't know if you've seen, and I can't remember the title of it, but I'll have to look it up. There's a horror docu series, and with like a bunch of horror actors and directors and writers, and each episode they talk about a different type of horror. So some of it's body horror, some of it's like slasher films, and kind of the history of those things, and some of the most important films in that subgenre. But one of them was plague horror, and so this film came up, and I have always really loved Vincent Price, but I had never seen this film, and so I added it to my list. And then it
Mhm.
just so happened to come up in this, in the list that you gave me. So I thought, well, all right, this is the time to
It's the
watch
time to
it.
do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny too because I also really want to watch the original House on Haunted Hill. I have watched the remake several times with Jeffrey Rush, um, who now knowing that Vincent Price played that original character, it's like, oh, I mean, yes, of course, Jeffrey Rush in that film is very Vincent Pricey, but yeah, so I think those are two films that I really wanted to watch, just to kind of get that experience.
Okay. And so I just want to say that we talked about, so this was directed by Roger Corman,
Mm-hmm.
and we talked about Roger Corman in my episode with RJ Joseph, where we discussed Chopping Mall. So my listeners, if you want to know more about him, I go into a lot of detail about Roger Corman. So go take a look, listen to that episode. And then we also talked about Vincent Price before in the episode with neighbor Tim, where we discussed The Tingler. and we go very deep into Vincent Price on that one. So if you want to learn more about Vincent Price, go take a listen to that episode for the Tingler. So we are discussing The Masque of the Red Death from 1964, and starring Vincent Price as Prince Prospero. And he also plays, first of all, let me back up and say, spoiler alert here. We're going to spoil the shit out of this movie. So if you haven't seen it, or if you just don't care, then continue listening. But if you do care, then go check out the movie. But Price also plays Red Death during the unmasking scene, starring Hazel Court as Juliana, listed as his mistress, but I thought it was wife. I don't know where
yeah, that was a weird dynamic there.
Yeah.
I want to talk about that, but yeah.
Hazel Court was also in The Raven the year before with Price and Corman as well. And I was reading up on her. It seems like she was one of the first like scream queens. Like she was in The Curse of the Red Death, The Man Who Would Cheat Death, this movie, and The Raven, and a bunch of other ones. So that was cool. I really liked her work in this movie. And then Jane Asher is Francesca. And she's the peasant girl is how she's listed. And she was only 17 years old during the filming of this movie, which is problematic, I would say, or I don't know why you would need to cast her a 17-year-old. And I don't think a lot, I don't know, maybe you tell me how you feel about that, but she was naked. Yeah, she went into the bathtub. I mean, we didn't see her breasts. But so yeah, I think that's kind of problematic.
I mean, there's definitely some rapey vibes coming from Vincent Price's character in this film, for sure. It's very clear that like she's supposed to be this innocent foil to Juliana's character, right? And so like, whereas Juliana is dressed very sensually and she has like, these very low cut bodices and all these different things, and is clearly the more experienced, I guess, or maybe sexually liberated, and Francesca's kind of the opposite of that, right? But yeah, it was not great,
Yeah.
Oh, Hollywood.
David Weston as Gino, who was Francesca's lover. Nigel Green as Ludovico, Francesca's father. John Westbrook was the Red Death in both physical form and voice, but he was not credited, which I don't know why. We had Patrick McGee as Alfredo, Paul Whitson-Jones as Scarlatti, and then Skip Martin as Hoptoad, who played the jester and I believe the term is little person or dwarf. If I'm wrong, please forgive me, but I've done episodes in the past where I believe that they prefer to be described as dwarves or little people. And then Verena Greenlaw as Esmeralda, who was Hoptoad's lover and was actually just a child, wasn't a dwarf at all. And her dialogue was looped by an adult actress. When I first saw her, I was like,
I'm glad you confirmed that for me, because I was watching this with my husband and we were like, that's just a child, right? Like they didn't even bother to find, okay, that's fun.
Yeah, and I'm happy that nothing was untoward with her, like, because I don't know if I would have been able to talk about this movie, but perhaps maybe when we see her, she's dancing like ballerina. She's a ballerina or whatever, and perhaps they weren't able to find a dwarf that had that talent. I don't know. I just, it's very puzzling. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, seems like a shortcut maybe was made there. And I was reading that Hoptoad is so like his storyline is based off of another short story by Poe, right, where he's kind of humiliated as a jester by the court, and then dresses up the court in a prank as orangutans, and then sets them on fire or something like that. So that whole storyline was very interesting, how they kind of like looped that other Poe story into this one.
Yeah, that's that scene, when we get to, we'll talk about it,
Sure.
is just amazing. I mean, like,
Yeah.
and so dark, and it seems, when I was watching it before I knew what you just said, because I looked it up as well, but while I was watching, I'm like, this seems out of place within this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And then come to find out that it's because it wasn't in the story at all. They just
Right.
added it later. So it's still great to see, but it did feel out of place. But real quick, during the early 60s, there were 8 films that Corman did that were that were Edgar Allan Poe stories that were translated into movies. So he did House of Usher in 1960, The Pit and the Pendulum in 61, The Premature Burial in 62, Tales of Terror in 62 as well, The Raven in 63, as well as The Haunted Palace, The Masque of the Red Death, which we're talking about in 64, and then The Tomb of Ligeia. I might be pronouncing that incorrectly. But of those 8 movies, 7 of them starred Vincent Price as the star.
Mm.
So this is like their Corman-Poe Price era, which
Nice.
is amazing. Now, of these 8 movies, I have only seen The Raven, Tales of Terror, and now The Mask of the Red Death, because my confession to you is that I had also not seen this movie.
Aha. Okay.
You got me. You got me. So, of these movies, have you seen any of that? They said House of Usher, Pit and the Pendulum, Premature Burial, Tales of Terror,
Okay.
The Raven, Haunted Palace, or Tomb of Ligeia?
The Fall of the House of Usher, I feel like I have seen at one point, but I truly have no memory of it. So clearly, I think it was probably just in passing. So I would need to revisit that one. It was interesting. I want to watch The Pit and the Pendulum because there's that one scene, or I guess it comes up a couple of times throughout this film where, and this is in the short story, I think too, but there's that clock, right?
Fuck. I'm glad you mentioned it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is swinging and it's shaped like a pendulum. And I was like, oh, I like that. Nice callback. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you caught that, because I noted that as well. I was like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
good. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No. So yeah, those were. So I haven't seen some of these other ones, but now maybe this will be my inspiration to revisit. I've always really enjoyed Poe's stories, and I think like he's probably, going back to what we were talking about earlier with kind of how not seriously, horror literature is taken in like canon or, kind of in the literary world. He's definitely one of those like outliers where his stories are very, very clearly horror, but he's taught as like serious or classical literature, right? Assigned literature. And so I think it's kind of interesting how he was able to, have that success.
He just had to
Despite
die
what,
in a horrible, mysterious
right,
way.
exactly. As you do.
You can't profit off it. If you profit at all, then you're not literature. So
Exactly.
real quick, so my favorite Poe story or short story or novella, whatever, is The Cask of Amontillado. Do you have a favorite?
That's a good question. I remember liking this story. I think I like. I remember The Pit and the Pendulum definitely like stands in my mind for the very slow creeping terror that it like evokes, and the inevitability of kind of what is going to happen to the narrator, right? But I think oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on the title, but the story where the narrator murders someone and hides the heart in the
Oh, The
floorboard.
Telltale Heart.
Yes, that one I think was the one that sticks out in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, the slow madness, I guess, or descent into madness.
Yeah, that was so good.
Yeah.
But I almost went with The Raven just because The Simpsons did it in Treehouse of Horror, and it's so, I love that version of it. But The Cask of Amontillado is one that I read later on in life, and I was just like fascinated by it. Yeah, I love Poe. I whenever for a while whenever I would go to used bookstore, I would always pick up whatever Poe, like little 90-page book that they had, like
Mm-hmm.
the Tales to Terrify You or whatever, and it was always Poe. And then I quickly
Right.
realized it's just the same stories like repackaged, and I have all
Right.
those stories like in 4 different versions or whatever. But yeah, I think Poe is when his work is translated it's into movies a lot of times it's so good. So I was really happy when you picked this one to talk
Yeah.
about it, and because I also hadn't seen it. So um first of all, the movie starts with that old MGM lion logo, which just felt like my childhood because I don't think that they
Yeah.
use that roar anymore. I had the volume too high. There's I was like, holy shit, that was scary. But I love to see that old logo. It felt real great.
Yeah. I
Uh,
mean, it's so evocative.
yeah. So on a mountain in medieval, sorry, on a mountain in medieval Italy, an old woman meets a red cloaked figure who's shuffling tarot cards. And it's so funny because it's in the middle of the night, like it's dark forest, but this old woman is in the middle of this forest, like picking up like sticks for like a fire. What is it called? Kindling or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Why is this old woman in the middle of the night like choosing this time to pick up kindling? Who knows? But hey, it works, I guess.
I just want to say that one of my all-time favorite like aspects of this film is just the Red Death sitting on this hilltop playing like or doing kind of tarot with himself. And I don't know, I don't know why that sticks out in my mind as like just kind of hilarious, but it happens in a couple points in the film because I think
Yeah.
like later the kid who's spared, I guess Gino, like, or no, I'm sorry, Gino the lover uh goes to meet Death at the hill as well, and he's Death is just
Playing.
shuffling those tarot cards.
I keep saying playing, but I don't think you play tarot. But like tarot comes up in some of your stories as well. I believe the this is it the scorpion
Yes, La Mujer Alacrán,
La
yeah.
Mujer a la
Mhm.
Cara, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
It comes up in as well. Is that are you do you dabble in tarot
I
reading, tarot card?
dabble.
Okay.
I want to very clearly say dabble, meaning like I am not an expert in the arcana, but like I have a few decks. I think I prefer the oracle cards more just because they have a little bit more like um openness to them, but I really respect other practitioners who do tarot. But it's just funny to me because it's like this idea that like death is because tarot is meant to be a divination tool, right? And so like death is divining something, like I think you see this a lot in other horror media where it's like someone is going to get their fortune told, or someone's trying to go and get some kind of counsel from a wizened old person who's doing tarot or telling fortunes, and it's like, but they're just stumbling upon Death at the top of this hill, chilling up there.
Yeah, it feels like tarot cards in this movie was more used like as a prop. They didn't really
Yeah,
go into it too
yeah.
much. And at the very end, the end credit scene, there's got I don't know if it was animation or whatever. It was kind of cool, but he was I'm assuming Death. Yeah, Death
Yeah.
was placing tarot cards, and I was hoping like when I was looking up trivia, if somebody would be able to read that
Mm.
fortune, because I don't know what it meant, but I wasn't able to find anything. And did you perhaps did you catch anything?
That's a good point. I didn't. I mean, I guess like so. There's the death card, right? And so there's that piece of it, but you know, and then I think like the hanged man maybe played a role in that. And yeah, no, I don't know. It's kind of challenging to think about, but like uh, I wonder if that was trying to kind of play into this idea of what is to come, right? And the foreboding of, the we can, I guess we can talk about the ending in a minute, but
Yeah,
kind
go
of
right ahead.
well, yeah, I mean, I think from what I remember, especially in this documentary that I saw before I watched the film, they were kind of talking about how the figures at the end that meet at the hill are kind of the different horsemen, right? Or like ushering in some kind of apocalyptic ending um, of the world. And so I wondered if that was supposed to be kind of this like foreboding sense of what is to come, or the other figures that were to come. But I don't know. Good question.
I see. I thought they were gathering for the world's first Pride event, Pride Parade.
I mean,
happy Pride,
I would
everybody.
love it. Yeah. that would be a much nicer ending.
Yeah. And so she comes across Death, who is shuffling tarot cards, and he gives her, well, we don't know what Death's pronouns are, right? So
yeah, I was like, we don't need to gender Death, I guess.
yeah,
But yeah,
Death gives her a white rose and then drops blood, and it becomes a red rose, and it looks really cool. I like that effect. Then and the Death tells her to take this rose to her village and tell everybody, I guess their time is coming, or their time has come.
There's like a day, I think he mentions like a day of
reckoning.
deliverance or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. And so next we're in the village, and Prince Prospero, played by Vincent Price, who is a Satanist, which I always like. That was a great, like, I've gone, I'm an atheist, but I went to Satan Con this year, which is a ton of fun. And so I always love to see media's representation of Satanists in movies and stuff like that. And this would be more like an Anton LaVey Church of Satan kind of Satanist, I would believe, as opposed to like the Satanic Temple, which is more of a political organization. But it's always, whenever I grew up Catholic, and I went to Catholic school for 8 years and got confirmed and all that sort of stuff. So I am fascinated by anything having to do with Satan, or like the church, like in a dark light, that sort of stuff. So what, and I didn't know that was going to be an aspect of this movie. And in fact, I don't think that it's an aspect in the story. I think it was added from the writers. So I was like really happy about that. I was like, all right, cool. I'm interested already. How did you feel about the inclusion of Satan into the story?
I guess I have complicated feelings about this, because on the one hand, I get where you're going with that. And like having been raised on one side of my family Catholic and the other Southern Baptist, and being absolutely like neither, and not really associating with Christianity anymore. Even though I did grow up in that kind of environment, I feel like I consider myself much more spiritual and more connected to, I don't know, witchy stuff, and kind of more nature connected in a way, I guess. But which, God, all my grandparents are dead now, so it's okay. But they don't need to know about that. But more kind of ancestral connections and things of that nature. A hodgepodge of different spiritual practices. But anyway, and so like I have nothing against the kind of Satanist like idea, I guess, and like the Church of Satan and or like the Satanic Temple, I've always found really interesting as a political organization, and kind of the activism that they do. I wondered with this story though, like it felt a little bit shoehorned in, I guess, as far as like, oh, this is the reason he's so shitty, like, or Prince Prospero's kind of evil, like brand of evil. It felt a little bit too expected for me. And I kind of, and then it like Juliana's whole thing with, I'm gonna wed myself to Satan, and she brands her breast with the upside down cross, and just I was like, this film was already running quite long, and this storyline seems to be going on a long time. But I don't know, I didn't hate it, but I do feel like, I guess what I wonder is like, do we really need a reason for Prince Prospero's evil to be like linked to Satan, when I felt like it was much more effective to just view him as someone who believes that he is invincible because of his wealth and power? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and like, does the story? I don't know if the storyline ties together the Satanism with death, because
Right.
he calls up towards the end. He calls upon Satan, and then we find out that the person, the mask of the Red Death person, was him all along.
Hmm.
So there was no, so I, that was kind of muddled. So there is no Satan, or just
Yeah,
Satan doesn't have time to show up for mere mortals, sort of thing, or like,
I guess.
or was it death? So like, that was muddled, right? And
Yeah.
so, like you're saying, yeah, I could see that, where it wasn't maybe necessary, and also kind of confused the ending a bit. They didn't stick the landing, I don't think.
Yeah, I think that I think maybe that this script suffered from just trying to do too many, like it was so sensual and sumptuous, and like there were so many beautiful aspects of the filmmaking that I think worked so well, but the story was trying to go in so many different directions and incorporate so many elements that, like you said, I don't think it necessarily stuck the landing. Although I did think the ending was really interesting and effective, in its like referring back to the original story, the original Poe story. But yeah, like I wonder if part of the Satanist piece too was this emphasis on Prospero's like push to corrupt or break, Francesca in some way, right? Where he's trying to like make her see that her purity or her innocence or her godliness and faith in God is bullshit, I guess, or I don't
Yeah.
know.
What I love about that, like, I find myself in the same position that I was in when I did The Devil's Advocate, maybe 2 or 3
Oh,
weeks ago,
love
where it's
that
like,
movie.
you're making a lot of great points here. I mean, I am
Right.
with you. Like, I may not go with you all the way to the end, but the points you're making are pretty fucking good. And it's the same thing here. When Prospero was talking to Francesca. So
Right.
when
Mhm.
Prospero was talking to Francesca, and he was kind of explaining why he follows Satan, or whatever the case may be, and she was saying that, how terrible it is, and how evil he is. And then he starts saying, I had an ancestor who, they're in the underneath the castle, and then the not the caves, I guess, the jail cell, whatever.
Mhm.
He's like, I had an ancestor who, was a monk, and uh they were tasked to kind of help the church, and ended up killing about like 600 people to save their souls. So he's like, wasn't that evil? you know
Right.
and she's like, you got me there. Like, so I was like, I like how they kind of did that. And but in the end, it's 1964, of course they're going to be like, the evil needs to not win, which is what happens here. But also, a lot of people die. I guess they were evil people as well, like, in the end, so it really doesn't matter.
Well, it's funny that you bring up the devil's advocate though, because something that kind of came up for me in this film is, especially just thinking about like where we are as a society, especially in the US, the devil's advocate is kind of making this argument that like capitalism is the real evil of, and capitalism and money and the pursuit of money and power is the real evil, and that, Lucifer is more the like person pushing you towards the edge, right? And seeing what you'll do, and in most stories, Lucifer is not forcing you to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
He's offering you choices, and you always choose the wrong thing every single time, right? It's supposed to be a comment on, I guess just like the fallibility of human nature. But in this one, I liked how, what I felt like was the real horror, I guess, of like Prospero's character is just how much of a spectacle he will create, and how much he will dehumanize each person that he comes in contact with. Like no one is sacred to him. I guess maybe a little bit Francesca, but like everyone is kind of up for ridicule, or he even calls like the ballerina like a pretty little toy or something like that. And I just
Yeah.
think, that's the real horror, right? I guess.
Yeah. I mean, like Prospero is one of those characters where you're like almost cartoonishly evil, especially with
Yeah.
Vincent Price playing him, with that mustache. Um, but I think with what you were saying about Francesca perhaps being sacred to him, I think, or not Francesca, I'm sorry, I can't remember.
No, you're right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
Francesca. Oh, but so Francesca being sacred to him, I think perhaps Juliana was sacred to him at one point, and then maybe he had his way with her, or she succumbed to him, and now he's like so indifferent to her and cruel to her even. And I feel if this movie were to go longer and not go the way that it did, I think if Francesca were to stay in the castle longer, she would be in Juliana's role and be dismissed. Like right now, I think that she is just his new plaything.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
he is,
everyone is disposable to him
yeah,
at any point except for him. And I think he's playing the narcissist, very, very well.
yeah. And so we see him arriving to the village, almost runs over a baby. It's cartoonishly evil.
Asshole.
And then he invites them to like a ceremony, like saying it's a feast, and they're like, oh, basically we picked the food, you're gonna let us have a little bit of it, you're gonna let us eat your crumbs. He's like, yeah, that's exactly what I'm gonna do. It's like, okay,
And you
so
should be grateful for it.
yeah,
Yeah.
they start getting mouthy and he doesn't like that, right? So that's Gino and Ludovico start getting mouthy, and so he's gonna kill them. But that's when Francesca begs for their life, and there's a tussle ensues. And then he sees there's some screaming, and he goes to see what it is, and it's that old woman that we saw earlier, and she has this plague, the Red Death. This looked so terrible to me. Like they just smeared blood on her face.
Yeah.
I was hoping for a bit more. And I was like, okay, maybe that's just the first evolution. And later on in the movie, we'll see like the last evolution of what they look, maybe pustules or something, plus something really cool. No. It was completely, it fell flat for me. I don't know how you felt about that. And perhaps maybe it's I haven't read the story, so maybe it's what's in the story, but for me it didn't land. I was wondering how you felt.
I know that in the story, I think it is kind of similar, where it's like they're covered in like dots of blood or something like that. Yeah, they did kind of yada yada the makeup on that one. It wasn't
It's like, you get
great.
it.
Right. It's like, it's very clear that and it's funny because maybe that points to the idea that like the death is both the center point of this film, but it's also not the most important piece, I guess, right? Like that how they're dying is not as important as kind of the result of Prospero's cruelty, I guess, or I don't know. It seemed like the symbol was enough, the red as a symbol was enough for them to kind of just move on from there. But I don't know, that could have just been a crappy makeup department.
It definitely felt like an afterthought, but I do see how like it was, you were only going to see it at the first scene, or the second scene, whatever, and then the very end scene. So I understand not focusing on it a lot. Like you come for Vincent Price, right, and his portrayal and all that sort of stuff, but it was just a bit disappointing for me to see that. But so he takes his prisoners, and then he sends a message out to the whole land to tell the local nobility to come to his castle. So he's kind of like circling horses around the rich people, which of course, like the rich people, like you see it every day in this day and age, like the rich people have the access to healthcare and all that sort of stuff. Like it just never changes, right?
And
Like,
submersible vehicles that
yeah,
supposedly will protect them, but maybe not. And bunkers now, where they're preparing bunkers for themselves.
right, exactly. Or during the pandemic, they were able to escape the big cities and go to their
Mm-hmm.
cabins and
Mm-hmm.
in the woods and all that sort of stuff. So very, very prescient to see this.
Very.
Yeah.
And
Um,
even sorry, no, I just wanted to say too that like as the pandemic kind of continues in this weird whatever space we're in, it's really interesting because like I think what we're told by the wealthy and what we're told by government officials is not the same thing as what they're doing to protect themselves. So like you have these big conferences and things where there's like multiple levels of testing and like super amazing like air filtration systems and all kinds of crazy shit like that. But it's like, hey, lowly peasants, you don't need that shit. Go back to work. Just keep doing your thing. No, doesn't matter how many times you get COVID and become, dead or disabled. So yeah, this watching this definitely felt like, oh, we're living it. We're living it right now.
yeah, it's like we need the cogs to get back into the machine,
Mm-hmm.
and we'll just use your blood as the oil. Like
Exactly.
Um, so at the castle, he introduces Francesca. He introduces Francesca to Juliana and it's basically like, hey, Juliana, like this is my new side chick. You
Right.
get cool with it because you don't have a choice. And basically kind of like bring her up to speed, like clothe her and all that sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, and Francesca very quickly realizes that she is under the protection of Prospero. So she's like, hey, you got to do what he told you to do. So get me your finest clothes.
Mm-hmm. And let me bathe in this swan bath.
The gold
the
swan
bathtub,
bath.
yeah, the gold swan bath. Oh,
It
goodness.
reminded me of like um, one of Donald Trump's bathrooms you see in like his lavish places. All you need to, the only thing that was missing was the box of classified documents all around.
Oh yeah,
That's the only thing that was missing.
you got that reading material.
That's true.
Yeah.
Um, so now the nobility has gathered, and this is where we see Hoptoad and Esmeralda, and they're dancing, and Esmeralda accidentally knocks over a goblet of wine onto Alfredo, and who immediately strikes her.
Yeah.
And I did not think anything was going to come of this, but obviously, like we talked about later on, Hoptoad exacts his revenge, and it
Mm-hmm.
was so sweet. It was so like amazing. Just loved it.
Yeah.
And I was reading that story about nobility being burned alive at a party was actually based on true stories. Was just true event that happened like in France in the 1300s, where
Amazing.
like a king and three of his higher ranking officials were like playing around dressed up as monkeys or something like that, and they were tied up hanging, and somehow one of them got caught on fire. Perhaps it was all candles, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of them got caught on fire, and three of the four ended up dying. The king,
Mm.
I don't think the king ended up dying, but three of the four ended up dying. And so, like, I think Poe used that as kind of an inspiration for the story of Hoptoad.
It's interesting about that because what surprised me about his character was, I guess it surprised me that for the time, that this, kind of disabled or not necessarily disabled character, but this, character who was not, who was like subjugated and kind of that he had more autonomy and a role in kind of exacting his revenge than I thought he would, which was pretty cool. I just appreciated that I think I agree with you that maybe it was a little bit disjointed, but I guess what I liked about it was, this person kind of exacting revenge on this uncaring society of nobles who are treating everyone as kind of either your entertainment And the minute you become, less entertaining or troublesome, you are disposable, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. So I just thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah. And to be clear, although I did feel it to be a bit disjointed, I loved its inclusion. And
Yeah.
I would not want it to be taken away. So then Juliana, kind of sensing a threat from this new woman, Francesca, kind of tells Prospero that she now wants to be initiated into the satanic cults.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could tell that, like, perhaps he's been like trying to get her to do it, and she's been like, for all we know, she could have also been kidnapped. I don't think she was there with her free will either, so she's been kind of resisting this. But now that she sees this new threat, and she knows that she's been safe because of the protection of Prospero, she sees this new child, really, because she's 17 years old.
Right.
She sees this new person and is like, oh, I am, my safety is threatened. Okay, let me do this thing where I will now be in his cult, in his satanic cult. So then we also see Gino and Ludovico. They're in prison and under the castle, and they're kind of being taught armed combat. But Gino's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to learn how to kill my father-in-law, my neighbor, my friend, I should say. Like, I'm not going to do that. So you'll have to think of another way to kill us. You'll have to be the one to kill us. And this really comes to a culmination toward at the end of the movie. That's just, I thought, was really interesting, and I liked the way they did it. But I liked here how Gino was. When you're imprisoned, you don't have a lot of ways to fight back, but you do have yourself and what you can do. And he's like, I'm not gonna let you do that to me.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of is this, similar to Francesca, the moral stand that he's taking here is kind of like wavering on this knife point of like, are you going to become as bad as they are in the pursuit of survival? Because like over the course of the film, it's definitely this thing of, or the situation where people are put into this moment of choice where they're kind of like, are you going to survive and have to live with yourself as this like coward, or someone who begged for their life, or are you going to take a stand and die, right? They're not given a lot of great choices, let's just put it that way.
So Julia performs a ritual in the Black Room, pledging her soul to Satan, and then she gives Francesca the key to get Ludovico and Gino out of the cell. During their escape attempt, Gino, Ludovico, and Francesca are recaptured by Prospero. So Juliana performs that ritual. I don't remember if it was before or after, where she burns herself, or what's the term for that?
Branding. Yeah.
Branding, where she brands herself with an upside down cross.
Right.
Which is how I rate movies. So I love that. Love to see the branding. Well,
sure.
Not that branding, but I've known somebody who did branding.
Interesting.
Yeah, it was for a Latino fraternity. And I don't know if all Latino fraternities do that, or if it was just this specific fraternity. It looked gnarly as hell. Like,
yeah,
it was disgusting, and it took like a year to heal. It was just disgusting.
Oh.
So you can tell how far gone she is. In my mind, I'm thinking she is so far gone that she does that, and that is body horror, which is what we were talking about a little bit. So what did you think of this aspect?
It's interesting because, like, you were talking about how her safety and her position in this court is threatened, and like, I feel like her character is a really great portrayal of like someone who has suffered a lot of abuse, right? And so where you are hyper vigilant, right? You're kind of like, that with someone like Prospero, who is this like narcissistic, horrible person, that you are kind of always subject to his whims. And the minute that he decides you're no longer useful, fuck you, you're out of there, right? And so I feel like that, she's not given a whole lot of choices in this. And so, this is her kind of fucked up way to exert some kind of control over her life. The scene where she sells herself to Satan, I guess, or weds herself to him, and there's like some really weird racist, like rapey or
Yeah.
torturous, like figures coming in of all these different, like, weird racist, like depictions of different ethnicities coming in and like terrorizing her was truly a bizarre choice. I didn't know what the hell that was supposed to mean, but
Well, I was so
yeah.
happy that at the very least they cast a black man to be
I
the
know.
black
Oh
character,
God, I had that same thought.
because he was the last one showed. And as we were going along, I'm like, oh God, oh God. I think there
Yeah,
was
we're
perhaps a
gonna see
person
some
who's supposed to
blackface.
be Egyptian, perhaps. It was the one who was
Yeah,
supposed to be Chinese, perhaps. I was like, oh no, please don't, please don't.
yeah.
And finally, when they showed, I was like, okay, good. Like, yeah, everything
But
else is terrible, but
right.
the bare minimum in a movie from 1964, they didn't have somebody in blackface.
Yeah, but I think that it, and again, maybe I think this is pointing out the weakness of this whole satanic storyline, which is like that to me spoke to how other religions and other cultures are labeled satanic because they are not Christian, right?
Right.
Like anything that is not falling within this like Catholic, kind of umbrella, I guess, is therefore automatically satanic. And so I was like, is that what we're trying to do here? Is this just like, ooh, white woman being threatened by like brown men, or brown or black men? I don't know. It was
Yeah.
interesting.
I mean, I definitely see that. Like, whenever they can other somebody and make
Sure.
them the evil part of it, they're going to do that. And I definitely think that that's what they were doing. That's what they were going for here. Especially, I think you mentioned it. There were some rapey vibes. They were definitely stabbing her the
Right.
knife repeatedly. I don't know if that's what they're going for. I don't know if they kind of cut away before the worst parts happen. Like, were you feeling that perhaps she was sexually assaulted by these things? I
Yeah.
don't know. It was left vague enough, which I kind of appreciate.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of have a hard and fast rule that unless sexual assault is depicted in a film where it is like addressed in a sensitive and thoughtful way, I will not sit through a rape scene. Like that's kind of my hard out. And I've stopped watching films and and shows because of that. Like I tried to watch the Bates Motel series at one point, and it's like first episode is like very graphic rape scene. So
That's
yeah,
too
no,
bad.
I just think it's one of those things that it's hard to do well, and I feel like they fumbled with that, but I agree that at least it wasn't like this like super graphic depiction. But both Francesca and Juliana are put in this position where as the two main women of the film, their virtue or their sexuality or their bodies are kind of the tipping point. It's what they are bringing to the table, right? It's their
Mm.
only value, I guess, to the men of the film. And so I wonder if that was kind of what Juliana's selling herself to Lucifer was meant to depict. I don't know. Interesting.
And I really love the Juliana character. Like,
Yeah.
she was great. She felt to me like a Barbara Steele in Black Sunday, perhaps, or
Ooh,
Black
okay, interesting.
Sabbath. One of the, I get both of those mixed up, and I've done both already. But where she wasn't perhaps the main character, and you were supposed to be kind of afraid of her. She was supposed to be the villain. In fact, she was so good at what she did that you were attracted to her. Like, you wanted
Mm,
to see more of her, and you were intrigued by the character. That's what I was getting from her, because I'm like, I want to follow her. I'm
yeah.
really like, Prospero is kind of boring. Like,
Yeah.
we get it. You're evil. And you're doing a great job at it. Like, I want to see what she's up to. I want to see her journey. Like, this movie through her lens, through her, like, hearing Juliana's story would be amazing, I think.
I I really agree with that. And she also kind of gave me Bride of Dracula kind of vibes, like,
Yes, yes.
this,
Yeah.
you're spiritually and physically kind of tied to this monstrous man, but you have your own needs and sensual expression and kind of like self that, so you're at once like monstrous yourself, but you're also victimized, and you exist in kind of this interesting middle space. So yeah, I completely agree. That would have been really interesting.
Yeah, and even my main problem with the Bride of Frankenstein, because I just saw it for the first time like a year ago or two, perhaps 2 years ago with Max, was that I hadn't even seen trailers for it. I didn't know the Bride of Frankenstein, I'm assuming, is a movie about the Bride of Frankenstein. But lo and behold, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it yet, I'll give you 5 seconds. Come back in like 30 seconds. Is that I'm sorry, have you seen Bride of Frankenstein?
I've seen scenes from it. I don't think I've
Okay.
watched the whole thing all the way
I
through.
won't. I won't tell you then. I would just say that I wish there was more of her in the movie.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we'll leave it at that, because I wanted her story, like we're talking about with Juliana here. I wanted to hear her story.
This is very tangential, and I won't harp on it too much, but I think Kenneth Branagh's Frankenstein adaptation, which I think is one of the more, it's truly a wild film and one of the more interesting adaptations, but probably closer to the book than any other film has gotten, I think. But Helena Bonham Carter's depiction of Elizabeth in that film, and her autonomy and kind of like sexuality in that film, I think, is really, really well done. And her transformation into the bride is really interesting at the end. So yeah, if folks haven't seen that one, if you're looking for something a little bit more in depth, I think that one is great.
Yeah. What is it called? It's just called Frankenstein, or
I think it's
Kenneth Branagh. I can find it quickly, but
yeah, if you've ever watched any of the films that he both directs and stars in, I mean, it is like super over the top, but Robert De Niro as the creature is wonderful.
Okay, it's the one with De Niro as a creature. Okay. I
Yes.
haven't seen it. I definitely want to see it now.
It's really, really good.
Okay.
But anyway,
so at a feast, Prospero finally summons Gino and Ludovico, because they've been, like I said, they haven't been training how to fight. So he has a kind of like they're there for entertainment for the crowd, and they're gonna be, he set up 6 knives, and one of those 6 knives is tipped with poison that will kill the person within 5 seconds. And instead of hurting each other, they have to hurt themselves to kind of save the other person. I thought that's just ingenious. Like, if you don't do it, if you don't take the knife, the other person is going to take the knife and be poisoned. I mean, it's just amazing. And I like the inclusion of it. And so they both start going back and forth, pulling one knife out and slashing their arms with it, waiting 5 seconds to see if they die. And so they do that for 5 times, I believe. I think there was a total of 6. They do it 5 times.
Yeah.
So if in fact Prospero was being truthful and there was the 6th one, the last one is the one that has the poison on it, and Ludovico grabs it and kind of launches. What is the word?
Yeah. I think lunges. Yeah, you're right.
lunges at Prospero to kind of kill him with this poison knife. And Prospero, I believe he probably assumed it was going to happen, and like swiped the knife away, and then stabbed him with a sword, killing him immediately.
Yeah.
I was not expecting this kind of, maybe I should have, maybe I was just like all in at this point, just like kind of watching the movie, but this was a kind of like a great surprise to me. How did you feel about what was going on here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really worked well in this regard, both to, because I think throughout the movie, once Prospero captures Francesca, his whole goal is to kind of break her in some way, right? It's to break her faith, to like bend her to his will. And I think this was, both a spectacle for his like crowd, I guess, his assembled courtiers or noblemen, but also a way to kind of like fuck with her and break her spirit. I think it also kind of, it's interesting because it speaks to what I felt like was in Gino's character, especially when they're in the previous scene where they're trying to get him to fight and he refuses until he kind of has to. This idea that, like, for Prospero, his worst fear or his worst outcome is that you could die, right?
Mm.
But I feel like for Gino and Ludovico, the worst outcome is that your loved one could die. And
Right.
that difference, like, because you could care for somebody, they're not just these disposable playthings to you. That really is what that scene kind of like pointed to, is their humanity and their hope that they wouldn't have to sacrifice their loved one for themselves, I guess, or their own safety.
Yeah. And it feels like that angers Prospero, like
Yeah,
you can dare to love somebody enough to not want to hurt them or whatever. It's like in his mind, he cannot perceive that, I don't believe.
exactly. Yeah.
So then Ludovico's dead. Prospero's cast out of the castle to be killed by Red Death. So then Juliana undergoes that. This is when she does the final initial ceremony that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And then she awakens from her dream. She comes out into the crowd at midnight, I believe, is when they're going to have their ball. And she's just immediately attacked by Prospero's falcon and killed. This is silly. This is a silly scene.
Yeah, I was like, damn, dude, like, she didn't even get to do anything cool. I was like, is she gonna get satanic powers now? I really wanted to see some kind of more in-depth showdown between her and Prospero, but I don't know.
Yeah, like she's definitely disappointing, but I don't think that they treated the character with any respect.
Yeah.
And it was merely a person to play off of Prospero. And at this point, it's just kind of like Prospero. Like the writers treated the character just like Prospero was treating them. Like when they're done with them, they just toss them aside, which is exactly what happened with Juliana. There's no longer need for her, so they killed her in a very uneventful way. I mean, killed by a falcon, how does it even, it makes no sense.
I don't know.
It's not like the falcon pecked her heart out or something, it just made no sense. It's just silly. And we didn't even mention the fact that Prospero at the beginning of the movie treated his guests like they were laughing, and he's like, oh, you're laughing, well, now be a pig, right?
Yeah. Oh,
and
God.
that scene, or okay, now be a snake, I believe. I had them written down.
A worm or a snake, and yeah, there's pigs, snakes, there's a lion, and like a horse that someone has to ride. I mean, everyone is, again, like, everyone is disposable to him.
Yeah.
Everyone is ripe for his, humiliation. And so it's kind of interesting how, he is kind of acting. He even says, like, he's the protector against, or he says something along the lines of like barrier against chaos, right? I'm the barrier against chaos. And it's like, okay, but what are you protecting people from when you will just as easily humiliate them and kill them, whenever you see fit? It's kind of bizarre. I don't know.
I just had a kind of epiphany, and this is just my point of view, but it seems like the Christian version of God that says, like, you have to subjugate yourself to me, and you have to say prayers to me and lift up my word, otherwise you're going to go to hell. So it's like, oh, so it's like you're protecting me from you, sort of thing. And that's what's happening with Prospero. Prospero is protecting himself from, or protecting them from himself, which they end up dying anyway. So that's just I was just a tangential thing that I thought. So then the rest of the villagers come out, and they ask for amnesty. That's not the word. They ask to be let in to the castle. They say no. He says no, they're not going to let him in. They refuse to go away, so he kills them all except for that one child that you saw. So this is more of a way of just seeing how evil Prospero still is.
Right.
Then we see the scene with Hop Toad, where he has persuaded Alfredo to wear an ape costume, which I don't quite understand. So he got in chummy with Hopto got in chummy with Alfredo. He's like, hey, I'm kind of looking to make a change from a team to your perhaps I can come onto your team if you're hiring, but here's a way we can make you more powerful than Prospero, I guess. I'm not sure. What was
Yeah.
the end point in Alfredo's mind if he did this, if he dressed up like an ape and made everybody laugh? How was that going to affect change for him?
I don't know. It doesn't seem like he thought very much through. He wasn't a thinker. He was it's kind of like oh, you silly lackey, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who vies for power at any opportunity. I wonder if they thought that it wasn't just an amusement, but like kind of this idea that like the great ape is this like exotic, terrifying figure, and so like maybe he would be imposing in some way. That was the only way that I thought maybe you could convince Alfredo to do that. But yeah, again, like some of these plot points are a little bit yada yada, right? They're the motivation behind them doesn't seem super thought out.
Yeah, it's like hurry up and shut up about it, sort of thing.
Exactly.
So like as we talked about earlier, so Hoptoad gets Alfredo to wear the ape costume, and then they kind of in the ball he kind of rolls around with a woman on the floor attacking her, and
Yeah.
then Hoptoad takes the opportunity to tie up Alfredo and then hangs him from the, it's something I guess, and kind of roped him up so he was hanging from the ceiling, and then proceeds to set him on fire, just like throws
Oof.
brandy on him and sets him on fire. And
Amazing scene. Loved it.
everybody's around just looking like it's entertainment. They're just like, it's an absolutely amazing scene, like you're saying. And this is where I was like, wait, this is not the same movie, but I guess you could I guess you could say that this is like the height of entertainment for Prospero. And he even says like to one of the guards, hey, let Hoptoad know that I was amused by what he did and give him 5 gold coins for the job that he did, So, but yeah, I absolutely love this. It was so good. And like they actually set the person on fire. Chef's
Yeah.
kiss.
I mean, yeah, fuck Alfredo. He sucked.
Yeah.
But also, it kind of goes to what I feel like is Prospero's goal is not just to entertain himself and his assembled guests, but like, that he wants to try to convince everyone, and especially Juliana, but Francesca, like how he can reveal the worst of humanity, how he can debase and bring anybody down to like his level, I guess. Because no one steps in to help Alfredo, and everyone is just kind of like, oh, cool, interesting. Moving on now to our like orgy,
Yeah.
So
yeah, he even says like, hey, he tells the guards, hey, clean this up. Who can have a party with this stuff? Like, okay.
Exactly. It stinks in here.
Yeah.
Right.
So during the ball, Prospero notices the entry of the mysterious red cloaked figure. He follows them because he believes him to be ambassador of Satan. He asks to see his face, but the guy says no. At the ball, all of the nobles have now died of the Red Death, but their corpses keep dancing. So that was really cool. But again, the Red Death is just red paint smear or
Right.
blood smeared on these people's faces. So if you're looking for something cool, it was, for me, it didn't really hit. But for you, when you saw this scene, how are you feeling? What was specifically with them dancing around in the red paint and all that?
Well, I know that they talked about this in the documentary I mentioned, but what I really loved about that, I feel like that ending scene from a visual perspective was the best one of the film, where he's stalking through the different colored rooms, and there's this like, kind of orgy of, and by orgy, I don't mean just sexual, but like this kind of like sensual movement around him and all of that. So like from a visual perspective, I really loved that idea, that he's stalking this figure through these rooms and the light coming in from the windows, which I think that felt the most connected to the original Poe story than anything else in the plot. But because most of the plot is not in this or in the original story, but I liked that they kept dancing, because it's almost like this how to describe it, but this like orchestrated, spectacle of death, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if I took any like particular symbol from that, but it was interesting for sure.
I think the idea of what happened and like the visuals are great. But I think perhaps the execution wasn't the best, but the visuals
Sure.
were great.
Yeah.
So Prospero asks Francesca to be spared and given the same high status in hell as he believes himself will receive. The figure complies, and Francesca sadly kisses Prospero before leaving. The figure turns out to not be a servant of Satan, but the Red Death itself. I don't know if I caught that or not. Did you catch it that it was actually Red Death?
Yeah, I
Okay.
got that idea knowing with how the story ends. So, like if you read the short story, that's kind of the ending, and this idea again that like death comes for us all. No one, despite their riches or their power status, is immune from being affected by death. Like
Right.
kind of that idea that death is a great equalizer. So I knew that was going to happen. I didn't know that it was going to be him, like
Yeah.
reflected in that.
So he rips off the mask to reveal his own like blood splattered face.
Mm-hmm.
Horrified, he attempts to flee through the now infected crowd. And then cornering Prospero in the black room, the Red Death notes that his soul has been dead for a long time, and then he kills him. And then the Red Death later plays with the surviving girl using the tarot cards that we talked about earlier. Other similarly cloaked figures gather around Red Death, each wearing a different color: white, yellow, orange, blue, violet, and black. And I was wondering if there's any connection with the rooms that we saw in the castle. There's the yellow room, there's a white room, there's a violet room, and there's a black room. We don't see an orange or a blue room. But there's got to be some connection there. I didn't catch it.
I think that it is supposed to be reflective of that, but then I was also like, okay, but if some of these are supposed to be like, they're kind of talked about, if I remember correctly, but correct me if I'm wrong, it's like they're brothers or they're like friends or something meeting on this hill. And so my thought was, because Prospero talks earlier about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? And
right.
So I was like, okay, these are the horsemen, but there's more than 4.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, are these other plagues, that maybe are going to descend upon the land?
Okay.
Again,
they're like
a little bit muddled.
There's the 4 horsemen, and then there's sub horsemen under each
right?
one, and these are the sub.
Yeah.
They're like mini bosses. Okay.
Yeah. Who knows?
And so the cloaked figures discuss among themselves how many people each of them have claimed, quote unquote, that night. And when asked of his work, the Red Death notes that only 6 are left: Francesca, Gino, Haptoad, Esmeralda, the little girl, and an old man from a nearby village. The Red Death declares "Sic transit gloria mundi," which is Latin for "thus passes the glory of the world." And the cloaked figure walks into the night. Over the procession are Poe's words, "And darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all." And that's the end of the movie. We do see the end credit scene that I talked about earlier, where it's all red and we see death laying down some tarot cards. And I was really interested to see, like we talked about earlier, what that meant, and we talked about that. So that is the end of the movie. So what did you think about The Masque of the Red Death?
I think overall I did really enjoy it. It was really visually interesting. There were just a lot of like great scenes. And you talked about Vincent Price's character being, and kind of his depiction of Prospero as being pretty over the top, I guess, as far as like the depiction of his evil. And then certain ways he was very like twisting of the mustache villainy, but I did feel like his like dynamic with Francesca kind of showed a little bit of his wish to connect with someone, or like that he could somehow connect with her humanity. I don't know, like her innocence was somehow a balm for him, or his soul. I don't know, maybe that's too much of me reading into it, but I appreciated that there was some subtlety there. Like we talked about, there were, a lot of intersecting storylines that I don't know work super well. When you're watching movies like this from a different generation, and like for me as a woman, I'm like, it's very clear that the women of the story were kind of, they had central roles, but like you said, like Juliana's character could have had so much more development in this and didn't. And so, how disposable were they to the storyline? But overall, I did really enjoy it.
Yeah, I thought I think the main draw here was Vincent Price.
Yeah.
I believe that's what they intended to do, was Vincent Price, and so they gave him the majority of like stuff to do. But like I said before, I feel like Juliana was really the most interesting character that I enjoyed, played by Hazel Court. I think she did an amazing job here. And
Yeah.
so I've seen other, like I said, Corman-Poe Price pictures, and of the ones I've seen, this is probably my least favorite. I enjoyed it, and I love being in this era. Like I love the 60s, and I love the color and all that sort of stuff. But I don't know, something didn't draw me to this one, and I'm not quite sure exactly what it was. Maybe it's just like for example, the movie just ends.
Yeah.
We don't figure out we don't see what happened with Hazel. Wait, did she die? Juliana, sorry.
The little, yeah,
I said
Juliana
Hazel
died.
Court. Juliana dies.
Uh-huh.
We didn't see what happened with Francesca.
Right. And also, sorry, she, like, her like Stockholm syndrome, like, oh, I can't leave you, Prospero. I'm like, girl, the fuck out of there. Like, why are you sticking around for this dude? He's done nothing but abuse you this whole time. That was weird.
Yeah, you're literally a hostage right now. He killed your father a couple minutes ago.
Yeah.
So there was just some things in it that weren't the best for me, but I always love to see Vincent Price. I love that, like, the production value of the movie was great. Like the castle was amazing. They actually used the castle from the scenes. Sorry, the production used leftover stuff from the movie Beckett, which came out in the same year. And so typically a movie of this stature wouldn't have all this production value, but because they were able to use the sets from that movie, it was just amazing. So I really enjoyed those aspects of the film that I enjoyed a lot, but there was aspects of it that really disappointed me, specifically the Red Death. Would have liked to see more there. I would have liked to see more from Juliana. But overall, I think it was a good movie, and I'm glad that I've finally seen it. I can take it off the list.
Yeah.
Because I do eventually want to see all of the 8 Corman-Poe Price movies.
That's on my list now too. I think that would be a fun summer, project, just to watch, some of these other films, because I have a lot of love for Vincent Price, and I think I would be interested to see just kind of the different depictions that he can do, and just his character or characterization change across these films.
Yeah, and correction, I just want to say there's 8 Corman-Poe movies, 7 of them starring Price. So I want to see the 7 starring Price, and perhaps the 8th one as well. So
nice.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and rate this film out of 5 upside down crosses. So for you, what would you give The Masque of the Red Death?
Maybe three upside down crosses. Yeah, I mean, again, like I said, and I agree with you. I think from a production value and a visual standpoint and kind of a stylistic standpoint, I think it was a really interesting film. I think maybe that it leans too hard on that, and it didn't. It wanted us to kind of just accept a lot of things at face value that maybe, and I don't know, maybe an audience at that time period was more accepting of just kind of a lot of loose ends in the storytelling. But yeah, I think a three.
Three upside down crosses. And I think I'm going
Yeah.
to agree with you on that. Like 2.5 is way too low for this movie.
Yeah.
3.5 seems a little too high. But I would say I was between a 3 and 3.5. But the how they portrayed the Red Death was disappointing to me. So I'm going to do 3 upside down crosses for the Masque of the Red Death. Still very happy that I saw it. Still enjoyed it a lot. Always love to see Vincent Price. I want to see more movies with Hazel Court because she, like I said, she was kind of like the scream queen who had other horror movies that she did. So I want to see more of it. So I'm happy that I've been introduced to her, and perhaps I've seen her in other things, but I just never noticed her. I do want to look into that more. So I'm happy that I saw it. So what we do now is that I would recommend one horror movie to you in a similar vein, and I would also ask for one recommendation from you.
Okay.
Okay, Leticia. So for me, my recommendation to you would be, wow, I've already forgotten.
Witchfinder.
Yes, thank you. Wow, my brain. Yes, my recommendation to you would be another Vincent Price movie. I think my favorite one of his that I've seen is just, I believe, absolutely amazing is Witchfinder General. It's kind of, I don't even want to tell you anything about it. If you get a chance to watch it, I think you would really enjoy it. So Witchfinder General would be my recommendation to you. Do you have a recommendation for me?
Yeah. I think I mentioned it earlier, but I looked it up. So it's Kenneth Branagh's film Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Okay.
And it was made in 1994. So it's a little bit more slightly newer, although now that I'm thinking about it, it's been like 20 something years since then.
Let's not talk about it. Let's not talk about it.
Yeah, we don't need to talk about how old I am and yeah, my relationship to that time period. But anyway, but I think that film is doing a lot of really similar things visually that this film is trying to accomplish. There's just like the lighting and the sensuality, and but it's definitely grosser. I think the makeup is better. I think that the effects are better, and I think the storytelling is better in a lot of ways. But if you're, Frankenstein is a similar exploration of like death, our relationship to death, our relationship to life, who is disposable, who is not disposable. And so even though there are moments of that film that are definitely way over the top as far as, Kenneth Branagh, who's this like Shakespearean actor and sometimes can go way, 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 way over dramatic, but I do think it is a worthwhile film. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that suggestion. I'm going to be adding it and watching it almost immediately.
Nice.
So Leticia and I are going to go ahead and continue our conversation over on the Patreon show. So we're going to go ahead and end this portion of the episode. Thank you, everybody. Leticia, thank you so much for joining me and talking about the Masque of the Red Death. I had so much fun doing so. If you could please tell everybody once again where they can follow you or how they can support your work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Miguel. I really, really enjoyed talking about this film. And yeah, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Leticia Urieta. And you can go to my website, leticiaurieta.com, for more information about other works of mine and workshops that I will be offering in the future. I am going to be offering a body horror writing workshop for adults through Austin Batcave in October. So I'm really excited about that. And yeah, sign up to volunteer, reach out to me on social media or via email. I'd love to hear from you.
All right, awesome. And the name of the show is the Sunday School Sessions. This is so brand new. I'm still getting used to it. So we're going to switch over to Patreon. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening, and we will talk to you next week.